So let's make an enemy. So we want our enemy to follow us, to follow the player when the enemy and the player are at a certain distance. So first let's create an enemy. Let's give the enemy shape as a cube. So prefab, game object, 3D object, cube. Okay, now drag the cube from the hierarchy into the asset folder. This would give us really putting the cube in the prefab in the asset folder makes the cube a prefab. What is a prefab? A prefab is a game object that can be added multiple times in the scene. So now if you want to add several cubes, all we have to do is drag the cube from the prefab folder into the scene like this. So this, this, this. Now, if we want to change all the cube at once, to add components or to add material or to add a script to these cubes all at once, all we have to do is double click on the prefab cube here and add the component that we want to add. So we want to add let's add a material, create material. Let's the material is to color the cube. We're gonna give the cube a little color. Let's color it red. So to color it red, go to the inspector, choose red, drag this here. Now, there you go. Now, all cubes are now red. So if you want to add a characteristic, a color, a component, a script, all you have to do is double click on the prefab here and do it here, and all the cubes will be given the characteristic that you want to give them to. So now let's add a script. The script I called mine follow. You can call yours whatever you want. This script will be given to the cube, to all cubes, so that when the player is a certain distance from the cubes will stop following it. And if they catch it, then the game is over. So double click on follow. Mine is follow. You can call yours whatever you want. So now this script is going to be given to the cube. So all cubes are going to have this script. This script says whenever this script should say that whenever the cube is at a certain distance from the player, it should follow it. So first we have to introduce the player. So game object, call it player. Now we create a game object player. So now we need to find that player on the field. So player equal game object dot find player. Now this script says when the game starts, find player game object. So is where the game object player is. That is, it would find the game object that has the name player. So we want whenever the player is at a certain distance, let's say 30 units from the enemy should follow it. To do that, we first have to we should create a distance between the game object and the enemy. So to do that, we have to say if distance, oh no, vector 3 dot distance. So from the current object, which is the enemy, transform that position to player, which is player that transform that position. Now, if this is less than 30, if this is less than 30 minutes, 30 units, do the following. So this says that if the position of the enemy, which is transform.position, because the reason why the transform.position is the position of the enemy is because this script is going to be put inside the enemy. So whenever you say transform.position, you're talking about the game object that contains this script. So transform.position and player.transform.position, the player's position and the enemy's position, if their distance between each other is less than 30 units, we want the enemy game object to turn towards the player and follow it. To make the enemy move towards player, we first have to make it move in the direction, turn to the direction of the player. To do that, we do vector 3 deer equal player transform dot position minus transform dot. And I'm gonna explain what I'm doing here, but first let me finish the whole code first. Dot normalize. Okay. So basically, what this does is that this vector, this position, which is this point, which is at the player's position, minus the transform position to the position of the enemy, which is the position of the game object that contains the script, which is the enemy. Uh, uh, we subtract these two positions. We subtract these two positions to get the vector between enemy to player. And then we normalize it to have it a unit to make its magnitude 1. So now, if we want to move the enemy towards the player, all we have to do is transform, which is the transform dot position, which is the position of the enemy again, or position of the. Whenever you say transform the position, you mean to say the position of the game object that contains the script that you're typing on. So now transform the position plus equal, add to the position. First, make it go into the direction of deer, which is the direction from enemy to player, deer, times the speed. Let's make the speed 5 times time dot delta time. So now we have our code completed. We're saying first we introduce the player, and then the game object player, and then we found the player, and then we are checking every time. This update checks every frame, and it checks every time if the player's position and the enemy's position is less than 30. If it's not, don't do anything. If it is, then go towards the player. So let's test it. Before we test it, we should add the script to the cube. So go to cubes on prefab, this cube, double click on it, go to add component, type the name of your script, whatever you named your script to be. Mine is follow, so this is what I want. So now all cubes have the script. So let's check it just to make sure. So this cube has a follow script, and this cube has script, and this cube has script. Okay, but there's also something else we should do. We named, if you remember, we named to find player. So it's gonna look for these characters, the string. It's gonna look for this string, and if it finds it, it's gonna add it to the variable player. And before, also save your work. So save everything. Okay, so now we need to, as if called our player, so we need to change capsule's name to player. Otherwise, it wouldn't find it. So rename player. And now let's test it. They're following. See? Okay. As you can see, we played the game. The camera doesn't follow the player. How can we make the camera follow the player? We're gonna be doing that right now. So to make the camera follow the player, we only need to type three lines of code inside the C# text script. Sorry. So first create a script. I already created mine. I called it camera follow, that we're gonna put inside the camera. So we're gonna design the script with 3 lines, and then we're gonna put it in the camera, and the camera will follow the player. So first, let's introduce the player to the camera. So first we have to introduce the player to the camera. To do that, or the main player, that is the object that we're supposed to follow. To do that, we use public, and I'll explain why I'm using public. But first let me finish what I'm doing here. Transform player. So I introduced the position of a GameObject player. Transform is for is used to define the position of a GameObject called player, or any player, any GameObject. Transform is used to define the position of any GameObject. So delete start and update, and then type in late update. Late update is specifically designed for the camera, and now we already typed in one line of code. And this private late object, I'm not considering as a line. I'm not considering as a line. We have remaining 2 lines of code that we should type in, and that's it. We have finished the code for the camera. So let's do it. So two very easy line to type. The first line is the desired position. We want to set the desired position of the camera. So let's call it desired. Let's define it. The vector 3, call it desired, and then define it. So it's player. The players, but we want it to follow the player. We want desire to be on the player, but not completely on the player. Then that is not where we cannot see the player. So if we want to see the player, we add an extra gap between the player and the camera if you want. So new vector 3, and now we define the gap. We not define. We select how far gap we want it from the player. How we want the camera away from the player. So let's 0. I'm gonna explain what I'm doing. Just let me finish. 0. I'm gonna say minus 20. So basically, what this is saying is that the desired position of the player, we want it to be 20 units in the back of the player, so we can see the unit. You can see the player 20 units away from it, and it will follow it, and the camera will keep a gap between itself and the player of 20 unit space gap. So now we finished the second line. All we have to do now, this is the desired position. So now we have to assign the desired position to the camera. All we have to do that is transform equal desired. Transform that position equal desired, and that's it. That's the entire code of the camera. So now let's try it. Before we try it, we need to add the camera follow script that we just finished to the main camera. I already added it, but I'm going to remove it and add it again just to show you how to do it. So go to click on main camera, go to add component, select the camera script that we already did, and double click and click on it. Now, I remember when I said player, public, sorry. When I show, let me go back to what I'm saying. Here, public transform player. So this the public exposes the transform field. When I wrote public, you get an open field like this one. It's a type transform because that's what we wrote the type of it to be. So now we can assign manually what we want to follow. Instead of writing find or a tag, we can manually insert, and that's better practice when it comes to one single player. When it's one single player, it's more better practice to put it as public and assign it in the inspector as manually. Okay, so let's play it and see if it works. It works. They're following me, and the camera is following the player.